The American medical grads, they aren't afraid to put pen to paper. During residency, I was at a hospital with some very elite US grads, and one of them there was applying for a fellowship, and it was going on about how, one of his close family members is a physician, was I think an ER physician and a writer for New York Times or somewhere. And, this resident had expected that a family member was going to write their essay for them and basically edit their whole application, and was actually a bit annoyed that they were having to do a little bit of the work themselves and give this family member some background. So when I heard that, I was like, if you're a foreign grad and you're coming from outside and these people have all these resources, it's really an uphill battle. So just to be on a level playing field with somebody like that, you'd really have to have somebody really going over your stuff, putting together a really good application.
Hey there, and welcome to the IMG Residency Match podcast. You're in the right place if you're an ambitious international medical graduate who wants insider strategies and inspiration to help you match into residency. I'm your host, Shauna K. Lester. I've been an admission consultant and writing coach for 12 years, and for the last 7 years, I've helped IMGs create residency applications that help them get multiple interviews, match, and create the medical career they want. If anyone understands the ins and outs of becoming an international medical graduate and being an international medical graduate, it's Dr. Francis Christian. Dr. Christian completed high school in the island of Jamaica, but he didn't go straight to medical school there, which was an option. Instead, he went to the US and he completed an undergraduate degree in biology. He eventually returned to the Caribbean, though, for medical school, St. Matthew's University in Grand Cayman, before matching into a residency program in internal medicine in New York. So Dr. Christian made the most out of that residency opportunity, which is why he's here today. He matched into a competitive pulmonary critical care fellowship, and he's now pursuing a second fellowship in sleep medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Harvard Medical School. I am really, really excited to share this conversation. I mean, I think Dr. Christian is a phenomenal human being, but more than that, the conversation really is full of gems for the IMG who is still in medical school, as well as the IMG resident. So we're talking about why Dr. Christian chose to attend a Caribbean medical school, 3 tips that IMGs can use to be successful in the residency match process. We also spent some time talking about the power of unpaid research externships. Some people like these, some people don't. But the power of these unpaid research externships for the IMG, especially IMGs with red flags who are, still just pushing against all odds to match. We talk about how you can be strategic as an IMG in where you do externships and where you rotate to facilitate the ultimate match outcome that you're looking for. We talk about how Dr. Christian used his time during residency to become a competitive fellowship candidate, which clearly he was and he has been. We also get into, just looking back, what would Dr. Christian change about his residency application? And then we get a little bit personal by talking about how being married to a physician impacted his experience in residency training and what it was like to welcome a baby during his first fellowship. Of course, we also make some time for some fun questions, and we got to talking about his favorite books and movies. So enjoy. So, Dr. Christian, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, glad to be here.
All right, so Dr. Francis Christian, do you mind telling us a little bit about exactly who you are?
I'm a third-year pulmonary and critical care fellow in Oklahoma City now. Grew up in Jamaica. Then I did undergrad in the States, came back and did medical school in the Caribbean. Went up to New York City for residency. So I've been all over the place, and now I'm in Oklahoma City for my first fellowship.
All right. So you said that you started in the United States with college, then you came to
Yes,
medical school in the Caribbean. Could you
yes.
explain what was your thought process behind making that move?
So the reason why I made that move was during undergrad I didn't have the best GPA. Kind of had a bit of a tough transition from high school in Jamaica directly into the U.S. college system. And having a good GPA along with the MCAT is very essential for getting into med school. So it would have been very hard for me to get in directly from undergrad into a U.S. medical school. So that's when I decided to look back towards the Caribbean schools, of which there are basically two paths. There are the U.S. offshore schools, which is like what I went to St. Matthews. And then, of course, there's University of the West Indies, which is about 5 years versus mine being 4 years. And mine was a little bit more of a direct path back into the States.
But you could have chosen to go into any career, but you were pretty sure that you wanted to do medicine, which is why you committed to it, I'm guessing. Is
Yeah, so my dad was a doctor in Jamaica, and my brother is now in the Cayman Islands. So growing up, medicine was always around. My dad was a country doctor in St. Catherine, and so I went to work with him.
What was it that you saw, if anything, that made you think that you could excel in medicine?
To do well in medicine, you don't just have to be smart, but you have to be able to communicate well with the patients, and the patients have to kind of believe in you and buy into what you're saying and doing. And
Talking about medical school in the Caribbean, specifically offshore schools, was there any part of it that was surprising to you once you actually got there?
Not so much. I was pretty prepared when I went there because I started to kind of read up about the schools and the pathways back into the States. And there are schools that have been around a lot longer than mine. For instance, like your Ross University and your St. George's. So there's a lot of information out there. Probably what was surprising was to see how many different people were there. You had some folks who were coming from England. You had some from smaller Eastern Caribbean islands. You had one or two other Jamaicans as well. A fair amount of Canadians, and of course others who had did undergrad in the United States. So probably it was the diversity of people who were there, which was a little bit surprising. It's not like it's just folks who are in America who are trying to go back in. There are quite a few Canadians and quite a few Caribbean people as well.
Did you change during your time there in any way? Because I know with college, there's a huge adjustment, which you kind of alluded to, but then also so much change tends to happen in college. Did you change any at all in medical school? And if so, how?
Not much. I'd kind of corrected my study routine, and I'd learned the U.S. system of education pretty well. I mean, a little bit late to salvage my undergrad, but towards the third and fourth year of college, I kind of figured things out, and so I was able to carry that forth. And so when you get to medical school, you'll see that, and mostly it's about doing well in the exams, and as long as you have good study prep, you can get by, you can do well. So I think for me, I really corrected my mistakes from undergrad by the time I had gotten there.
So, for the third year student who's at an offshore school and they really want to be successful in the residency process, in the match process, do you have any tips for them on how to do well in the process, in the sort of coming back, as you call it?
The exam scores are going to be one part. That's kind of what's going to get you your foot in the door or get you past the minimum cutoffs for programs to start looking at you. But also what is very important is starting to kind of get publications, lining up your letters of recommendation. Those are probably the two other very important things. You're going to need your letter of recommendations from people who are in the United States, not just people who are in the Caribbean or locally from your home country who are trained there. It has to be people who are actually in the United States. And then also if you can start to have one or two cases written up or small, projects that you can present at like a local meeting, those publications, you'll be able to put them on your resume, and that will sort of, build a groundwork so that when programs look at you, you're not just somebody with high board scores, but you're somebody who can go there and contribute and, be able to publish.
What's the very first step, though, in that publishing game? Like, how does it work at offshore medical schools? Do you approach the professors?
That will be in your third year. So you would need to you want to finish your step one, step two, and then once you go and do your rotations in the United States, you would need to find, an attending or a mentor pretty early in that process and see if, they can hand you a very good case that you can write up with them, and then that will serve that they will be on the case with you when it's published, and then get a letter of recommendation. But that should be in the third year, but very early. You don't want to wait until the fourth year until you have to apply. You want to have something kind of set in stone in the third year.
How do you do it, though? Is it just based on how you're performing in the rotation? Do you
Usually
ask them explicitly? How is it done?
you have to show initiative. So probably the first thing that you do is when you're rotating, you'll be under a resident. So you would have to, kind of ask them if they have encountered any good cases recently, and ask them, if you go ahead and write up the case, will they mentor you on it? Or if they're involved in any kind of, very small projects that you can help contribute on. But that's what you'd have to do. I mean, occasionally, if you have somebody who knows a doctor and attending directly, you can go that route. But usually you'll have to be doing it through a resident.
All right. So the match process can be very rigorous for people, especially the more hurdles that they have. And I'm curious if you going through that process, now that you're a fellow on your way to becoming an attending, I'm curious to know if there is any habit that you developed in your residency match process, not fellowship, but your application to residency, that has still stuck with you, like something that you're still using in your work today.
You really want to be as thorough as possible, and you don't want to undersell yourself. So you really have to try and bring out your best. And I was able to do that probably more in my first fellowship application, with the help of memorable essay. But you really want to be very thorough in what you put down on your resume, in how you present yourself, and then also your accomplishments. A lot of times I see people, kind of underselling themselves. And with the right coaching, you can give a better representation of what you have done, in your medical school thus far, and moving forward, just being as thorough as possible.
So you're saying that the process of applying to residency kind of showed you how to put together yourself on paper, how to
package yourself.
Right. And I was saying, how is that still serving you today?
I mean, that's something that, you kind of have to carry forward, because the further and further up you go, the more and more competitive it is. Everybody's having, publications on their resume. You just always have to try and redefine yourself, resell yourself.
So I'm curious, as you moved into, well, I guess maybe residency to fellowship would have been where you've seen this. But in residency, did you find that there was a difference between how American medical graduates versus IMGs would present themselves, or not really, when it comes to applying and competing for opportunities?
Yes, the American medical grads, they aren't afraid to put pen to paper. They aren't afraid to, really talk themselves up a lot, whereas some of the foreign grads might be a little bit more reserved. For sure, I would say the American grads were not reserved at all. I even remember a story. I was at a certain hospital rotating with some more, during residency, I was at a hospital with some very elite US grads, and one of them there was applying for a fellowship, and it was going on about how, one of his close family members is a physician, was I think an ER physician and a writer for New York Times or somewhere. And, this resident had expected that a family member was going to write their essay for them and basically edit their whole application, and was actually a bit annoyed that they were having to do a little bit of the work themselves and give this family member some background. So when I heard that, I was like, if you're a foreign grad and you're coming from outside and these people have all these resources, it's really an uphill battle. So just to be on a level playing field with somebody like that, you'd really have to have somebody really going over yourself, putting together a really good application. A US grad might already be ahead of the game because they have, graduated from a US medical school. And on top of that, they're going to have a very polished application. So, coming from outside, it might be a little bit harder, for the person reviewing the application to know how much you have done in medical school or what committees you've sat on, that sort of a thing. But you can't be shy. You have to put it all down and really make your application stand out.
Yeah, that's so interesting because you'll say that. And from time to time, I do hear stories like that as well. And I think when different individuals meet people like that, it's when they realize, like, whoa, this is serious. People are out
Yeah,
here with
it's
professional ghostwriters.
exactly. And so you're like, man, you really have to try and at least you're just leveling the playing field. You're not even, going one up.
Just going from or looking back to residency training, which part of it would you say is or was a highlight for you now that you're in a different place with more responsibility?
And the residents, my co-residents that I used to work with, were at a very busy hospital in New York, or a very busy program, and we were
Mm-hmm.
spread out across 4 hospitals. And it really was a lot of work. It was very busy. You were working most months out of the year, not a lot of off time. And when we were there, myself and a lot of the co-residents, we did achieve a lot. We, compared to like prior years, we were able to write up a lot of cases, get on projects, and then present it at national meetings. And so a lot of the folks in my class were able to move on and get very good fellowships. And I know the program had kind of struggled a bit in the years before in getting people to go out to other programs outside of the state and match well for fellowship.
But that has changed. I mean, in terms of time management, though, how did you do that? And how can other residents do that? If you're overwhelmed with clinical duties, how do you find time to get publications and all this stuff?
You really have to kind of network and link with your other fellows as well. So, one person might start on a project and might get the IRB approval for it, and then another fellow can come along, who probably is on an elective rotation and break the back of the work. And then the two of you get together and do the statistics. But really, it's linking up with other people. It's usually not a one man or one woman job. So you have to get in there and sometimes, like for instance, my residency program, there are people who came from the medical school there and then they went on to do residency. So they would have had like the inside knowledge on certain projects or even be started on them. So sometimes you have to get together with those folks and work with them as well.
It's a team effort. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to move on to fellowship based, how much of a role do you think the research that you had done in residency, how much of a role do you think it played in your match? Or just
Uh,
based on your interviews, how those went?
it does. It does play a pretty big role. Of course, one part that they look at is, it was at a university program that you did residency in versus a community program, and that has a little bit of weight, but not that much. But people are looking for folks who have scholarly activity because they think that if you come to their institution, you'll be able to continue that and go to national meetings and present papers. And that's really what they're looking for. Nobody is looking for somebody to just come, soak up the training and move on somewhere else. You want somebody who is going to give back to the field, and that's kind of reflective of their interest. So I would say it is of paramount importance. And in fact, a lot of people who are coming into medical school now, I know a lot of folks from India, from Pakistan, when they are finishing up their final year, they're coming over to the States. They're doing rotations over here, to be able to network and get letters of recs. But they're also getting like scholarly activity done. So applying to residency, they're having like 2-3 projects already. So
At the
that's why
beginning.
at the beginning, even before they start. So that's kind of how competitive things are now.
So get that research in by networking with your fellow residents and divvying up the work.
Yes. And if you
Okay.
know somebody who is in residency before while you're in medical school and they can help you get on a project, even more so, because that's kind of how things are moving forward now.
How do you mean? Like when you're in medical school and if you know a resident?
Yeah. So if somebody graduated from UE like 2-3 classes back and they're a resident now, and somebody who is actually in UE, knows that person if they can try and get them on a case or get them on a project and get them on the publication, that sort of a thing. It's something that we in the Caribbean do not do a very good job of. When you look around, most of the residents and medical students from Southeast Asia, they have been doing it well. They have a lot of links over here. If you look at the Lebanese as well, like American University in Beirut, I mean, they come over and basically do their final year in the States. A lot of the Jewish schools as well, like Sackler and those same things. Geographically, we are way closer to the United States, and we are way behind on that because we just don't have that volume of physicians who are, Caribbean, who are in the States and, can really help to parlay this for the others back home.
On that topic, I wanted to ask your opinion on those research externships or those research opportunities that are like 9 months, a year long, the research experiences that are a year long that some FMGs especially will take. And they're not necessarily financially compensated for them. I just had another chat with someone about that, and I'm just wondering if, in your opinion, it's worth it. Because I know some people who vehemently refuse. They're like, they're not going to get my unpaid labor. And some people think it's more than worth it because of the in that it gives you. So I'm wondering about your thoughts on that as a part of the application strategy for some people.
Yeah, I think for some people it's very essential. I mean, and for instance, at my medical school, St. Martin's University, you do the first 2 years down there, you do the last 2 years in the States. So you're already in the States for 2 years. So it's very easy when you're in the rotations to get started on it. Versus if you went to UE and you do your 5 years, and then you graduate, then if you need to spend 1 year in the States getting some research done, and it has to be unpaid, then that's maybe what you have to do. Unless while you were in medical school, you knew somebody who was over there who could get you on a few cases, we can get a few publications here and there, and you can build a good enough resume to get you directly into residency. Sometimes that's just not feasible, it's just not viable, and you might have to spend a year doing it. But if you can get a couple publications, and in that 1 year you'll meet enough physicians to get probably the 3 letters of recommendation you need. But if you were to roll the dice and not do it, and then maybe you only have 1 letter of rec from a US-based physician and then 2 from your home country, you're going to face a big uphill battle trying to get into residency.
I think the people who it's especially useful for are the ones who they just have all these other challenges. Like they're many years out, the step was like a borderline pass, that kind of thing.
I totally agree. If there's any kind of area on the application where, you're going to be looked at a little bit closer, so you're going to need to compensate for it in another area. And I think that's where, just doing the research for a year and trying to get on a paper is essential.
Yeah, so people can kind of see you and know you, because otherwise you're not going to pass.
Filtering. Yeah, it's so competitive now. I mean, it's like over 40,000 people apply for like a total of 30,000, I think, residency spots or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's very, very competitive. The folks who are coming out of like Pakistan and India, they do medical school like you, like a 5-year MBBS, but a lot of times they spend the last year like over here in the States, where you have to be in Jamaica, and then you have to, I think, do the internship for a year or something like that. So you can't go back and forth. And so people from other countries are like integrating into the system a lot easier, and it almost gives them basically like a track record of being in the States, and it kind of shows that they know the system and that sort of a thing compared to, folks in Jamaica.
Looking back at your own residency application process, if there's anything that you could change in terms of how you went about it, what would that be?
If I was able to, maybe have like 1 or 2 more research projects. When I applied for residency, I was very lucky. I got good letters of recommendation, and I also had some case reports that were published. But I never really had like a good research project, to really speak about residency. And if I could have had something like that, not a very big one, but a small one with some data, I think that could have served me well.
So curious to know. So Dr. Christian is married to a physician, and I'm wondering if for you that made residency training easier or harder.
Easier for sure. When somebody's in medicine, they kind of understand what you're going through as well. And they serve as a very good support system. Whereas for somebody who is married to or dating somebody who is not in medicine, they may not understand the work hours or the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis. For me, my wife was a very strong support system. And so that ended up making things a lot easier.
Okay. And how did you stay well during residency? The program that you were at, as you said, just very busy, notoriously so. How did you take care of yourself?
For me, staying well in residency, I like to walk around New York City, which is where luckily we were in a big city. And then I also read novels in my off time. So that's kind of what keeps me level-headed, so to speak.
And was your wife your major social support system, or did you have close friendships with some of your peers?
Yeah, she was my major support system, but then there were also quite a few people from the Caribbean who were in my residency program, not just in the year, but across the 3 years. And so we used to get together from time to time. And so that really helped out as well, too.
So could you tell us a little bit about what you've done post-residency?
So yes, I'm in a fellowship right now, pulmonary and critical care at the University of Oklahoma, and finishing up my 3rd year now. And I'll be going on to sleep fellowship next year.
Looking at the future of the field you've chosen to be in, what kind of work are you excited to do?
For me, I chose internal medicine and then pulmonary and critical care. So kind of stay pretty broad in the fields that I've chosen rather than going into just cardiology, which is the heart, or GI, the stomach, that sort of stuff. So for me, I've been luckily able to stay pretty broad, and I'll be doing sleep as well. So I see myself doing probably mostly sleep and the ICU as I grow older. And probably when I'm still fairly young, I'll probably try and be more hospital based and, be in the hospital, working in the ICU. And then as I get a little bit older, I'll be more in the outpatient setting, doing more of the sleep medicine.
And looking back, because actually during our interview, you've constantly said it's more competitive now, which I'm guessing you think it has gotten more, actually, objectively, it has gotten more competitive with time. But looking back at your own process of applying, do you think there's anything, did you underestimate or overestimate what it took to be successful in the process?
Oh, I think I estimated it pretty well. I had a lot of respect for the process going in. You want to overestimate the best you can. You want to have 0 slip-ups. You really don't want to have anything bad on the resume when it comes to the steps or any behavioral issues. You don't want to have any exam failures or anything like that. So I would say I estimated it well, and my advice would be to overestimate. Really come prepared for other people.
Did you have any peers or colleagues? Because I know oftentimes for people who did not have any slip-ups in the steps, they say, don't have any slip-ups in your exams. But what if you're somebody who you're just as hardworking and just as focused, but something was happening around that time, or you didn't quite understand what it entailed, and you did have a slip-up as an IMG? Is that the end for you?
It's not the end, but again, you may need to take that extra year and do some research in the States, and you might need to not just do it anywhere. Maybe you might try and do it in New York or maybe in Florida. Again, when it comes to residency interviews, I've seen kind of a geographic preference. For instance, I did a lot of my 3rd year in Baltimore and then my last year in Florida. I didn't get a ton of New York interviews, whereas some of the folks from other Caribbean schools like Ross and St. George's, who rotate almost exclusively in New York or Chicago, they get a lot of interviews because people who are reviewing their applications saw that they work in that area. And that's where the majority of residencies are concentrated. So if you're somebody who had a little bit of a ding on one of the steps, you might try and get a research, position somewhere there, because that's going to give you the most bang for your buck when it's applying, because people are more likely to give you an interview there.
All right. And so, Francis, could you tell us a little bit about what you do for fun?
I like to watch movies and read novels, and so this is my favorite time of the year because Michael Connolly always releases his book around now. John Grisham
Mhm.
releases his book around now, which is what I'm reading. So I always have plenty of books to read now. Early in the year is kind of dry. The stuff that I read is not out. So I read lots of
Okay.
novels. I watch movies and shows with my wife and play with my baby.
Oh, there's a baby. That's actually interesting. Okay, so since you brought her up, which I know, but I actually didn't bring her up because I didn't know if she was a topic of discussion. But what is that like being a parent while you're still training? Because she was born right when you
Fellowship.
started fellowship, right?
A little ways into fellowship. Yeah, it is busy. And when I look back on some of my colleagues in residency, who had children, I'm just like, I can't believe they did it. They were like
Mm-hmm.
superhuman. So it's something that you have to plan for and be prepared. Especially if you're making a transition, from one country to another. A lot of people who I've seen who had children, especially in residency, they had family support like close by to help take care of the child. So just be prepared because it's not easy and it's not like a 9 to 5 job with weekends off. You'll be working weekends and you need to kind of try and find a babysitter and that sort of a thing. So it's not easy, but it's doable if you plan correctly.
What makes it all worth it for you?
So what's worth it for me is, the joy that I get in practicing medicine, helping people get better, when we can. Sometimes if we can't, helping families understand the limitations of what we do. So I do get a lot of joy from my job doing that. But for me, it's not just, within the walls of the hospital. I'm not married to the job. I do have a wife and a child, and I do get a lot of joy, hanging out with them and being with them, which I think is also very important because I won't be practicing medicine until I'm 80 or 90 years old. And if God forbid I get sick very young, I am leaving the job to spend time with my family.
All right, so we're going to go back to something that's a little fun. I am going to put the timer on and ask you 60 seconds of fun questions.
Okay.
So, with these questions, the goal is to just answer as quickly as you can. Like don't think too much about it. Just sort of say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
So, New York or Florida?
Florida.
Train or plane?
Train.
Are you afraid of flying?
I don't like small planes. If you said big plane or train, I would say big plane. But
Okay.
when you're in Oklahoma, you have to take a lot of small planes.
Okay. Sneakers or shoes?
Sneakers.
On your day off, Netflix or movie theater?
Movie theater.
Summer or fall?
Summer.
Favorite movie?
Too many.
What is it?
Too many. I can't think of one.
Okay. Who, dead or alive, would you most want to meet?
Skip. Go on.
Last picture in your phone?
Picture my baby.
Last meal?
Last meal, falafel, falafel pita.
And most memorable moment with a patient?
We're not going to talk about that one.
All right, Francis. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think your interview will be really helpful to people who are in offshore schools. And that was cool because of your background. Actually, you have a very mixed sort of background. So you could speak to people from the public schools, people from offshore schools, residency fellowship. So I think everybody has a lot to get from this interview.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to the IMG Residency Match podcast. To learn more about how you can match into your dream residency, even if right now you don't know where to start, go watch a free training brought to you by the IMG Residency Match Application Accelerator at imgresidencymatch.com. By the end of the training, you'll know how to create an application that communicates to programs why they need to invite you to interview and rank you highly so you can match. Now, don't forget to share this podcast with at least one colleague you know applying to the match so you can celebrate together on match day. And be sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And now we close with a word of inspiration from me, your host, Shauna Kay. Maybe you don't need to drop out of the race. Maybe you need to change the lane you are in or create your own lane.